Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary Podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope. Welcome to another episode of Cultivate the Ordinary Podcast. I'm your host, Travis, joined by my wife and co-host, Jessie.
Hey.
Good to have you back. Because the
Happy to be
last
back.
episode I went solo.
It was great, though.
Well, I appreciate it. So we are both excited to talk about the theme today of beauty. I think that, so at the time of this recording, it's not long after we just got back from a cruise that, would you just kind of say, was full of beauty in so many different ways?
Yeah. I don't think I've cried so much because of beautiful things. I don't even know. I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a time that I've been that moved by so many different things. And it wasn't, I mean, I guess we'll talk about this, but it wasn't like the obvious stuff that, you know, the ocean or the sunsets, like those were great and those were beautiful, but it wasn't those moments that it was just so many other gifts.
It's a good way to say it. I'm going to be curious to talk more about that, like the things that you weren't expecting. So, because that definitely popped up. I would just say too, like, you've got this, you know, convergence of beautiful places. And then we were on this, you know, cruise specifically for the music that was there. So some of our, you know, our favorite band, Carbon Leaf, and then, you know, some of these other bands that just incredible musicians. And so you've got that, you've got beautiful places, you've got beautiful desserts. I mean,
well, you came back with some beautiful jewelry.
Well, and it wasn't a shell necklace, was it?
Yeah.
It was something more permanent.
The stress around the beginning of the cruise at the time, your brother was in the hospital and there was just a lot of emotion around that. Yeah. And there was this moment we were eating before we were about to go board the cruise, and just the conflicted feelings that you were going through. You were like, I saw a piercing shop. I was like, what?
Piercing shop.
What are you thinking? And then what were you thinking?
Well, okay, so like I had a pierced nose back it was cool for guys. I guess I was in the front edge of that, like in, I don't know, 2010 or something like that. So, and then when we moved here and worked at the children's home, I had to take the piercing out. But 45 now, and you know, you kind of, these last hurrahs of midlife, like I kind of wanted that again. So we happened to be in Fort Lauderdale before we get on the ship, and at the time, you know, as you were kind of saying, my brother Jeremy was going to the hospital for pneumonia and things were scary. He wasn't doing well breathing. And man, I happened to see this piercing shop. I'm just like,
this is what we do when we have an extra 30 minutes.
Yeah, this is what we do. We'll do that. And so this preceded, you know, any alcohol on the ship. This was a decision made, you know, completely just, And, but, so that was a fun little way to start it off.
I have to say it looks really good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I like the nose piercing. I'm glad you brought it back. And I think it's very, like, true to who Travis is the needing something intense. because of what you were going through, the stress of worrying about your brother. It was like, I'm just going to go poke a hole in my body.
I need something externally as intense as what I'm feeling internally. So this isn't a prescription for what others should do, but that's
That's what you
My
do.
own jacked up way of coping. So anyway, we're way off the rails here, but had an incredible time together. I think we're going to talk even some stories around, kind of what happened on that trip that hit some of the stuff around beauty. So, great quote from the writer Mary Oliver when she says, "Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." Just describing beauty. It's a beautiful way to kind of look at the world around us and take it in, and then what do we do with all that? So I love that. Be astonished and tell about it. So, Jess, tell me about a moment in your day where you've kind of alluded to this already, maybe on the cruise even, but like where you found beauty that might typically go unnoticed, or maybe it was a moment you weren't necessarily looking for it and you just got caught off guard. You were astonished, as Oliver says. Like, what would you say? What do you have?
Well, I think when I pay attention, like the quote says, when I'm actually paying attention, there's a lot more things that like arrest my attention. They just grab me and I can appreciate them. And I think what I was telling you about recently is that the fact we were on this restful, unplugged vacation, slowing down, made it a lot more possible to pay attention to everything that we were experiencing. And so I think that God gives us these like moments of beauty all the time, all day long. And it's just so happens we don't slow down and notice enough that we don't get to enjoy them.
Yeah.
So having that time to slow down, I just saw little things like the way that, an older couple interacted with one another that was just so sweet. Or like, we were at Turks and Caicos Islands, and there was a man selling shell art. And, I- it it wasn't so much the shells and the way that he cut them and turned them into, sculptures and wall hangings and things like that. It was beautiful. I mean, shells are beautiful. But what was so cool is he had this like childlike twinkle in his eyes. I like asked him a few questions about how he got into it or whatever. And he started telling me stories from childhood. And he like just lit up because I was asking him not just about the shells, but just about himself, and just what interested him in using the shells as a medium to make something even more beautiful. And the conversation turned to God's design and, creation and the world and order and symmetry, and like just all these things came out of this conversation with this local man who was selling his shells. So if anybody wants to look up TCI Shell Man, he is on Facebook.
I was happy to share that. So I love that because it feels like that moment. Was that a moment you cried, do you think?
Oh, gosh.
Okay. So you.
Yeah, I was like talking to him, just like wiping. I felt so like just on display because I couldn't stop crying.
Well, the cool thing about that story was that it's kind of, and I think the greater part of, I think what we're talking about today is that, even in that moment, I guess you were in a way caught off guard too, of like, we're in this beautiful place. Yes. But you're in this space and time where, just kind of taking everything in, and beauty through this shell stand. I mean, he had the conch shells was the art. And so you can't help but be like, your eyes, see that and are drawn to that. So the beauty is what draws you. But then it sounds like what you're describing is that in your interactions and talking to him and then hearing his story and seeing his, just exuberance, and then how he was so excited about this passion and all of that becomes beautiful too. And maybe the bigger beauty in the whole thing was like, it led to this like profoundly beautiful moment of interacting with this guy. It's
really interesting. I think just this topic of beauty, like asking yourself, like, well, what classifies beauty? Like, what do you consider beauty? Is there a definition for beauty? And I just think like there's a lot of different stuff out there, but just the idea that anything that kind of awakens or is pleasing to your senses, I think God made us that way to like something lights up inside of us when something's beautiful. And so like what were some moments for you either on the cruise or more recently that you feel like you noticed something, that something caught you off guard? It was beautiful.
There were some beautiful desserts on the cruise, man. That was yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think that I think for me, like going back to that time, because well, kind of I've said this in the previous episode when I talk about gratitude, is the backdrop of this cruise that we were on was that I was also personally going through some really challenging, hard things with my brother Jeremy, who, being having a TBI and needing 24/7 care. If you get pneumonia, I mean, it can knock you out. It can be, so there's a lot of fear and anxiety around that. And so I was kind of walking the emotions of that world back home, and then I'm immersed in all this beauty everywhere else. And I guess for me, one of the moments was we were in Puerto Rico at a port, and walked around this beautiful fort, and then we were walking some downtown, this beautiful cobblestone streets, and we come across a little poetry shop. It was art and poetry, husband and wife. And again, kind of like you, just caught off guard, going in there and just astounded by the painting. Her husband was a French painter, and then she was just an amazing local poet who's published and then had all kinds of like word art. So as someone who loves writing and words and quotes, I mean, I love that so much. That was for both of us, that was a really big highlight of the time, right?
Oh gosh. Yeah, that was another moment that being able to just like come upon this shop like that wasn't touristy at all. It was just kind of the heart of this woman who grew up in San Juan, and she has written poetry since she was a teenager, and really decided later in life to just make it like a living, and has written tons of books. And she met this artist, and they're just, you could tell how in love they are. It's so fun to watch people living out of their dreams and their imagination for what they could do. And the island didn't have any place for local poets to gather and share their work. And so they made it.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
So how would you say over time, like you probably had an understanding of beauty when you were younger, and then as you've gotten older and read books and been introduced to different types of poets and artists and writers, and how would you say your understanding of beauty has changed over time?
Okay, so one way would be, I love this quote by George O'Keeffe, the painter, and it says, "If you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for a moment." And I love that because that really, I resonate a lot with that, of my view of beauty evolving over time, of like part of it is a journey in life of like, maybe what you do tend to see as people as they get older, a lot of times. Now you may be an artist or a musician, and beauty was something that you were working with as you were crawling. But for some people, I think you'll see that it's maybe into middle life and beyond, that because of their careers slow down, because they have much more time, they can actually sit and maybe take up a hobby that's really about immersing themselves in self and gardening, or something like painting, or something that they just did not give them the time to like really be in. But so I definitely can see like my age being a little bit of a factor of like and of where I've been more appreciative of slowing down, and then places to just kind of be more aware of the beauty around me. And it doesn't have to be like, I guess, yeah, I'm trying to say I'm growing in that appreciation, because I think like the quote is I mean, it could be a fall leaf that you hold up. And if we would just let ourselves sit with that, God's beautiful creation design, I mean, that could become your world for a while of just, enjoying that and worshiping God through that. So anyway, for me, yeah, it's been that. And I guess the last thing I'd say is just sort of landscapes. I think I'm really drawn to how we're shaped by landscapes. Yep. So like I grew up in the northern plains, the high northern plains of North Dakota. And, for us, I mean, it was, complete tabletop flat land. There were beautiful landscapes within that. But I think now that I go back and visit and stuff, I'm struck by the power of the sky there. I mean, the sky, when they talk about like, Montana calls itself big sky country. Big sky is a thing. It's like, it is when you can see clouds just go to the end of the horizon, you don't get to see that everywhere. But then there's places like we have land in East Tennessee that's unbelievably beautiful mountains and all of that kind of stuff that then, others don't experience. So
yeah.
How about you? I mean, how was your...
I think when I was younger, I mean, I've loved art since I was young, 8, 10. I mean, drawing, painting, sculpture in middle school, high school, metal work in college. Like, I have loved every type of medium I could use to explore art, as long as I can remember. But it, like you said, it wasn't until later in life that I understood art from a different perspective. It wasn't just something I can get good at or use these materials to make something that then I show to people and they're like, oh, that's beautiful. Like you get attention for it.
Right.
It is now something that I see as a poet and priest and philosopher John O'Donohue talks about. It awakens you into your interior life. And so staring at a beautiful landscape, like you said, or impressive art, or reading a poem, these types of things, maybe watching someone dance or theater, music, all of it. That type of beauty does something that pulls you out of your life and makes you think deeper about like mystery and kind of that the unknown. And we need that. Like we need that so much as a culture. People need to be pulled out of the stress and the chaos of like normal life and have times, because it heals. I mean, it heals you from that,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's a good way to say it. There's definitely a connector to beauty being something that kind of leads you to like mystery and I don't know, the just the bigness of this world, the mystery of creation, like that it's so much bigger and there's more that goes on than meets the eye. It's just, there's something to that of like,
well, I think the deeper part of it is that because God designed us to desire to see beauty, I think it is a connector back to Him, and it ministers to us to bring Him to His presence. So,
and I think you're right to also that as image bearers of the Creator, who who's made beauty, there's something inherent to, I think, that longing to want to more often engage the beauty around us, but also we make meaning out of that because it's in our DNA of you know,
Mm-hmm.
as image bearers of God, the creator,
Yeah.
the great artist. So,
Yeah. So I do want to, if there's time for us to just real quick, the idea of
it's
beauty,
your podcast and mine. So,
the idea that things that are beautiful have different characteristics, right? So like as a visual artist, I think about like light and dark and
right.
texture and color, use of color, complementary colors, things like that. Like all those things make something appealing to the senses.
Yep.
But then when you think about writing or other forms of beauty or art,
Yep.
what are the things that come to mind for you that make something really beautiful?
That is such a good question. You couldn't have pitched a more of a softball than that one. I mean, that's a big one.
What comes to mind?
Um, I think part of it is kind of to be surprised. There's something about beauty, I think, that kind of catches off guard. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's something about like um, whether you're in nature, whether you're at an art gallery, whether you're on a fall walk. Um, it can be a general sense of like, all of this kind of stuff around me is beautiful. But I think when you're hit by something that you're like, oh my gosh, like, there is a like, ooh, it just sort of grabs you, turns your head,
Mm-hmm.
or, there's kind
Yeah.
of a surprise element. Is that?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I'm getting at is like there's certain types of arts you'll walk past, but for you, there's certain
Mm-hmm.
things that grab you. Is it like a fleck of light, or the way that the the shadows in the mountains dance, or
Yeah,
whatever, that you just your soul is like, whoa, this is a really beautiful moment.
man, that's another good question, but I guess I think a lot of us maybe don't have words for that, like what those things are. I mean, I think that's part of like what is behind the surprise.
Mm-hmm.
I have to think that yeah, there's a um, maybe if it's seeing a mountain sunset, it's the shadows with the color, with the way that in our
Mm-hmm.
case at our land, it was like the mountains become purple. There's just
Yeah.
something about that too that's like
There's a
that doesn't
time of
seem normal. That
day.
doesn't
Yeah.
seem like it. I think of I've said this before, but caring for my dad, who had late stage dementia, even at the end, it was fascinating me how he could lose all of his faculties. It's sad, of course, but it was as if his ability to still comprehend beauty through a sunset, through just his stillness, that never got touched.
Mm.
Like it was like, and I had a friend of mine talk about her husband also who had lost to dementia, um, loved music and loved playing the guitar. And she said, even to the end with him, dementia was never able to sort of stop music for him.
Mm.
So there is something that beauty has power,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that circumvent other. Uh,
Mm.
I mean, I think that's why and I want to hear your response as an actual true artist too. Like, but where I can't remember how she puts it, but the writer Simone Weil, talks about how beauty sort of it it captivates us in a way that it can kind of just go straight to the soul. Like there's something that it can bypass, um, kind of even rationale, logic. I mean, some of these things where it just has an ability. It's
Mm-hmm.
got this
Yeah.
power.
I think I listened to something recently. We can drop the link in the show notes, but it was an interview with John O'Donohue
Mm-hmm.
on beauty, and he has so many profound thoughts in there that I can't even do justice to. But he talks about it like a threshold, like it's this portal or this doorway into possibility, the future, sort of this world where you're taken out of your current state and put into a new one.
Right.
And that's that surprise that you're talking about. I feel like those moments that I get captured by something, my normal is interrupted, my ordinary is interrupted, and now I'm in an extraordinary moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that. It's yeah, I can't say it any better than that. That's
yeah.
I tried, but
let's talk about imagination and inspiration, because beauty is that, looking at art, looking at some profound poetry or writing or things that just wake you up, inspires you to do the same. I think most people are that way. What are your thoughts on being inspired by other artists or thinkers?
Oh yeah, I mean, I resonate with that a lot. Of like, my favorite authors are ones that just write in beautiful ways. I guess it's like, because it's easy to, when we talk about beauty and you're listening, and make it all about the visual arts or about music or about, I mean, those are just part, I mean,
Right.
You can be, I mean, a welder and you're making beauty. The arguably one of the greatest inventors of the modern times is Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome, just a modern engineering marvel. And he talks about in his process of design that he is so fascinating to me, but basically says some of the effect of like, if my design isn't also beautiful, I know it's not either ready or it's not completed. Like, even as a, when we think of like number crunching and engineering, but yet for this inventor or architect, beauty has to be part of, like, if it's not beautiful, he would say, then it's not, something's lacking. It's not done.
Yeah.
And
but that's a true designer too.
Right. But I think it's interesting that it's not necessarily I'm setting out to make this beautiful. It's that in the, maybe sometimes that happens, but in the process of the, like, if you're looking at it and the end result is like, I don't think this thing is beautiful. There's something missing then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that language of like, it's not quite right until there's an order to it. Because I think that's another thing that just God puts in us, this design for, or this desire for balance.
Yep.
And when you're talking about engineer and design, there's a type of balance and order that has to be present. And if it's not quite there and something's missing, then, it's not going to look beautiful and it's not right.
Right. Well, and I think you said this earlier. It reminded me too, as well, of Gregor Wolfe says, and this is his words: the purpose of art and making beauty is not to strand us in an alternate world, but to return us to the realm of the ordinary. Only with new eyes.
Yeah.
And so I added in the book Shiny Eyes that I expound that beauty in all its glory can, like no other thing, help us see reality more imaginatively and more hopefully. It's why we come back from vacation inspired by the mountains. We're hardwired to need that and be nourished by beauty. So I love that we're talking about here too with beauty, is that, it's when, it's funny, and I'm saying this in a goofy way, but when we're doing beauty right, meaning when we I think when we're rightly understanding the power of beauty, it is to say, this isn't to be this thing to make us escape the ordinary world. Now it can do that. We can long for, like, man, if I could just get back to the Swiss Alps or some whatever. But I love this idea though that it has the power to bring us back into the ordinary with new eyes and discover, hey, that majestic mountain peak may seem like a dramatic piece of beauty, but
Mm-hmm.
there is something in my backyard
Yeah.
that could be equally mesmerizing if I sort of,
Mm-hmm.
enter that space.
Yeah, all around us. I think another part of this conversation is time, and that like our relationship to time is, as Jonah Donahue said in this interview I mentioned, it's become perverted. Like we think because of stress and because of the pace of our culture, time is just, it's going way faster than it actually is, you know? And there's something that beauty does that slows us. And he said, if you take time not as a calendar product, but as the parent of presence, then you would see that that in the world of the spirit, God's spirit, time behaves differently.
Wow.
So it's just, it's almost like time has its own, it's not set. And because of stress in our life, time speeds up, but yet art and beauty slow us down.
Yeah.
And return us back to presence. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's behind why, we don't have words for it all the time, but I think that's why the longing to just be more outside, or to, people that love camping, or, there's a nourishment there happening.
Yeah. I would like to say though too, some of the most beautiful things are in art are the less polished paintings, where there's unfinished parts, or poetry that doesn't answer the questions. It's just leaves it out there. And I think there's a common trait with a lot of great art, that there's mystery.
Yeah.
And uncertainty.
Well, that kind of goes back to what you were saying about imagination. I feel like it's interesting you say that, because everyone, now we are talking visual arts here, but like when and again, people have all kinds of different, opinions on what's amazing art to them visually. But so it's interesting you say that, because I can picture like paintings that are almost, I mean, they're amazing, but they're so perfect, and maybe it's real. Not abstract art, but like realism.
Photorealism.
Photorealism.
Yeah. Looks like a
where
photo.
Yeah. Who's the guy that does the like farm landscapes, and it's like pheasants all the time, and like
gosh, what is his name? I know who you're talking about.
Well, great, because we're about to trash him on the podcast. So no, beautiful, and there's people that think that's incredible, and that's not a knock on that. That takes you somewhere, and maybe it is where it takes you more than the thing itself. But I think that it can be, to your point, like there is something about the unfinished something. I don't know, where it's like it's doing something to you as a result of interacting with it. Like it is taking you imaginatively somewhere, or maybe even on the same piece, like what is missing, what it's not saying, what is,
yeah,
because,
it's like great art will suggest something, but not explicitly like make it like plain.
Yeah. We did an exercise of that kind of, for me, this is an example of church one time where it was a famous image of, like, so we give all these examples and we blank out, we can't think of what or who it is. But basically it was Jesus, right, knocking on the door.
Oh yeah.
And in a robe, right? And then like, but on the other side of the door, there wasn't a historical person put there where you're like, okay, this is about that person, and you can start to make it. You put yourself there because there was an openness to what's happening.
The exercise of Visio Divina, using a piece of art to ask some questions like, what do you notice? Or Like, where are you in this scene? And then
Mm-hmm.
it's what we used it for was just to the scripture about, Jesus is knocking, like, and just what
Mm.
does that look like for you? Where are you? Are you right behind the door? Are you in the other room? Like,
Yeah.
um and sometimes, especially with like religious art and stuff, you have the opportunity to like look at it and go like, does this evoke comfort? Does
Right.
it create a sense of like frustration, or like what's coming up for you when you look at this, and why? What part of your story,
Yep.
or where does God want to speak to you through this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So again, this conversation of beauty may seem either high level or just like, what does this have to do with me now?
Hmm.
Like, I'm going through all this stuff. I mean, maybe it's a way to cope, but beyond that, like, this kind of seems, even the discussion seems, it can seem gratuitous. That's kind of the knock on beauty. It's always sort of this, um, can feel in certain circles like it's sort of this extra thing
Hmm.
that's
Like,
like,
I don't
yeah,
get time
great
for
if you
that.
can. Yeah, I don't have to. Someday I'll have some time for beauty, but or whatever. But but I think that's fascinating that even in a conversation like this, it can almost feel like that as well.
Mm,
That I love one writer talked about it's like beauty for many in places seem like it has to have a utilitarian function. What's it going to do for me? And his
mm,
response is beauty is itself the end. It doesn't have to serve that. It needs no introduction. So
mhm.
that being said, there's a pat on the back for beauty. What would you say are some real practical steps people could cultivate beauty in their daily routine, and even maybe beyond just individually in your house, but in community with
Yeah.
others?
Um, I mean, I would just start with like rhythms, like, because it's not just an add-on. I mean, I think that what you and I have both seen in soul care work is that, beauty isn't an extra. It's one of those things without looking for goodness in either God's creation or the creativity of everybody around us, like, and
Mm-hmm.
finding inspiration and rest and peace and joy from beauty. What you're stripped down to just the stress and the chaos and stuff, because if you really think about it, having a ton of fun, there's beauty in that. Like, you're just naming it, you're recognizing it. And so finding moments throughout every day, I would say many moments if you can, to look for it, to take 5 minutes and flip through a book of poetry, or
Mm-hmm.
go on a walk and look, like, don't put in your earbuds. Look for beauty. Um, Interact with your kids, looking for them to say something incredible,
Mm-hmm.
that catches you off guard. That's beautiful, because it will happen.
Yeah.
So
Could
I would say
say.
just the everyday stuff is things like that. You have to just create some rhythms of trying to
Mm-hmm.
pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But what do you think about the community side of it?
Oh
Like, what
man,
would be
gosh, can you give me an easy
thoughts?
question ever on this? Um, and my ears are so itchy. I don't know why.
You need
Okay.
to shave inside your ears.
Yeah,
You're getting
man,
old.
getting old. Gosh, you can. That's the funny thing is like you can have ear hair and like still get acne sometimes, and it's like, how are these things coexisting? Um. Okay, so the question was communities.
It's God's humor.
Yeah. Uh, maybe he finds
Beauty and
my ear hair beautiful.
yes, it's a good accent to the nose ring.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. I think like to me it kind of comes down to things like I don't know, like maybe making it more of a practice sometimes when you get together of like, you know, or just kind of hey, people that with common interests of like whether it's hiking, camping, these are kind of outdoor things, but it could be like making something together. Maybe I really love the idea, and you and I have talked about this, but is kind of hosting like just a space. It could be your house, friends over, and make it a cool, time to just hang out and bring stuff to do that
Yeah.
you're like making. And it could be music, it could be recipes that you want to share, it could be someone's working on a painting, I don't know,
Writing.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but you're making this communal space of coming together and kind of making beauty together,
Just
or
creating. Yeah.
creating, yeah, creating together. And
Yeah.
that's
And I think the
um
cool thing is that inspiring like environment is like let's lay down the insecurities of like I don't want anybody to see what I'm doing, and lay down the fear that maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I'm not
mhm.
really an artist, or anything like that, and just say, let's just say everybody is an artist, everybody is
You
contributing to
mhm.
developing and creating something in life.
Right.
So what if together with a bunch of friends you just be creative and see what
Mhm.
happens, like even fun things like word association, like you throw out
Mhm.
some words and just go like, what do you associate with this? Now go make something and like
Yeah.
let's come back together in 30 minutes and see what happens.
Yeah.
um I love watching like improv, like music be made just on the
Mhm.
spot. It's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Well, so that's an idea that not everyone like is going to vibe with, but I do think back to the idea of also just like what is common interests of, like, I've known people that are into bird watching. Maybe you love watching the stars, maybe just inviting getting to take some of those experiences that are always solitary, if they are, and just saying, who do I know that might enjoy this too, and taking the risk to invite others, and
Mm-hmm.
or be open to like being invited into things like that. But I think that's a
Yeah.
way that we can kind of enjoy and cultivate beauty in community.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, and there's that aspect of then witnessing, like, because when you're used to doing something completely by yourself, you can
mhm.
still recognize that it's beautiful. But then when you have somebody to witness it
Yeah.
with you and you can talk about
Oh
it, it's so much better.
yeah, I mean, and well, and that's as much as you can kind of see the place for with on social media, where when people see beautiful things, we are one of our first things is this sense I have to share it,
Mm-hmm.
and um but behind that, whether we want to judge how much we're overdoing that, or can anything sort of just be experienced without a Instagram post, like, that's
Right.
a whole nother thing. But behind that, though, I think it's what you're saying, is that instinctively we are hardwired to like uh, this sunset. I mean, I'm driving on the road and I capture this. I can't just keep this.
Mm-hmm.
I want others to see it, or it's a
Mm-hmm.
share as a gift. So that's interesting how I
Mm-hmm.
think we are wired to share beauty that we witness.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of good directions we can go with this topic of beauty. Um,
Yeah.
Never gets old.
I'm going to close this by reading a short excerpt from my book, Shiny Eyes: Seeing Better Through the Lens of Joy, Tears, Beauty, and Hope. Um, Ian Cron is a fantastic writer and writes on beauty and all kinds of other things. But he gives this really moving account of someone being at an orchestra performance, I think it was, and how they were just completely just captivated, dazzled by it. And at the very end, just it was like something was just rising up in them when it finished. And we all have our version of what that thing might be, whether for me it wouldn't be that, but what he writes. So picture someone that's at that performance and then is deeply moved at the end of it. And I love what he writes. This is Ian Cron's words in that example. Is it possible that during this evening's performance we unconsciously sense someone standing behind the beautiful, someone who is its source, and we were moved to praise him as well?
Mm.
And kind of gives me chills, because I think behind everything the sunset, maybe it's a beautifully written book. Maybe it's whatever that is, a hike that inspires you. There is something behind that. We feel like we see God as the author. God is behind this, and it just turns our head to him. I love that so much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful for sure.
Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.